In this video, I'm going to show you how to use our exposure triangle training tool to balance exposure. Understanding how ISO, shutter speed, and aperture work together is important if you want to use manual mode. It's also essential if you want to know how to choose other shooting modes appropriately, such as aperture priority, shutter priority, and program mode. Beginners are often confused when presented with these three factors placed along a triangle diagram and then told that these factors must be balanced. How do you balance a triangle? What you really need to do is think of each factor as its own seesaw. It can tilt towards brighter or it can tilt towards darker. If you already have correct exposure and you tilt one factor darker, then the image becomes underexposed unless you tilt one of the other factors to balance it. Let's see how that works using our tool. Our training tool is available for sale in our Etsy store. You can follow along with how we balance exposure even if you don't have this tool. In this video, we are using a simplified version. Purchased versions have more information, instructions, and details included. With the laminated version we mail out, you use these little markers that can be moved. Notice the three factors are all lined up so that brighter exposure is on one side and darker exposure is on the other. Let's talk about the numbers on each of these scales. These numbers along the scale are called stops. Each movement one stop to the left doubles the light, and each movement one stop to the right halves the light. When you take a reading with your camera, it might give you numbers that are in between these whole stops. These are known as half and third stops. We are going to use the camera and set it to auto mode. When I half press the shutter, I get a reading with the settings the camera has chosen. I can also take the photo and then view the photo to see those settings. These will be our starting point. In this sample photo, I used auto mode to take a reading, and those settings were shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, aperture of f5.6, and ISO of 800. According to the camera, this would be proper exposure. Depending on the scene, these numbers could be almost any combination along the scales. Now I move my markers to the settings given to me in auto mode, 1/125th for shutter, f5.6 for aperture, and 800 for ISO. And now I'm going to go into my camera's manual mode and set these exact same settings. Here is the resulting photo I took in manual mode. I get the same exposure as I did in auto mode as long as my position or subject hasn't changed or the light hasn't changed. Now I'm going to change the shutter speed. I'm going to move the shutter speed marker 2 stops to the right, and I'm going to make this same change in the camera in manual mode. According to our scales, we have just made our exposure off balance because we moved toward darker. So I take a test shot, and yes, the image is now darker and underexposed. If I move the shutter speed like I did, 2 stops darker, then I have to balance this by moving one or both of the other aspects the opposite direction towards lighter, like balancing a seesaw. So I can move one factor 2 places, or I can split it up and move both of the other factors 1 each for a total of 2. Let's try that. I'm going to move ISO 1 stop and aperture 1 stop towards lighter. Then I'm going to go make those changes in manual mode on my camera. Now my exposure taken in manual mode with the balanced settings should be properly exposed and look like that first image we took in auto mode, as long as my position, the subject, or light hasn't changed. The light did change a little bit here, so it is a tad brighter than the original. So why is this important? If manual mode just means moving the numbers around to get the same exposure as auto mode, then why not just use auto mode all the time? Well, a few reasons. 1, sometimes the camera gets the exposure wrong in auto mode, and then you can't fix it. In auto mode, you basically have no control. The second reason is each of these 3 aspects of exposure have secondary effects they create, and you can use these for creative control over your image. In auto mode, the camera will select very average readings. Those readings may give you the effect that you want, or they might not. Or they might give you an effect you don't want and can't get rid of unless you know other shooting modes. That wraps up the basics of how the training tool works, but we have an additional video with more examples in practice. It will demonstrate the secondary and creative effects of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. In these examples, we will use our tool to make adjustments to the 3 parts of exposure and use them together to accomplish the artistic vision we have for each shot. Even if you don't have our training tool, you can still follow along for a better understanding of exposure. I hope this video was useful for you. Please like and subscribe and check out some of the other videos on the Focused Camera channel. Thanks for watching!